The rain had been relentless that afternoon, as though the heavens themselves were weeping. The cemetery in La City was a forgotten place, its tombstones old and overgrown, its pathways muddy and slick with water. The distant hum of city life seemed to fade, swallowed by the steady rhythm of falling raindrops. It was the kind of place that demanded reflection, a place where time stood still, and Jaden Okoro, wealthy beyond measure, powerful beyond words, found himself standing for the first time in years. Jaden had everything that could be desired: sprawling estates, luxury hotels, a fleet of private jets, and a business empire that spanned continents. But as he stood over his mother's grave, there was only one thing he felt: emptiness. His gaze lingered on the neglected tombstone, its once pristine surface now dull and overgrown with moss. He had not been here in so long, not since her funeral. His thoughts, for so many years, had been focused on anything and everything but this grave. His mother, gone for years, had faded from his life just as this grave had faded from his memory. As the rain continued to pour, something caught his attention. It was a soft sound, almost inaudible over the storm, the sound of cloth rubbing against stone. At first, Jaden thought it was just the wind or the rain hitting the ground with such force it created an illusion. But then he saw her, a woman, kneeling before his mother's grave. Jaden stood frozen for a moment, his heart skipping a beat. She was soaked to the bone, her clothes clinging to her body as she worked tirelessly to scrub the gravestone, her hands raw from the effort. The woman's face was downcast, and though the storm battered her relentlessly, she showed no sign of stopping. Her eyes were hidden, but her devotion was undeniable. Who was she? Jaden took a step forward, his voice breaking through the rain. "Hey!" he called, the sound sharp and intrusive against the quiet of the cemetery. "What are you doing here?" The woman froze. Her ragged breath echoed through the storm as she slowly lifted her head. Jaden's heart skipped again when he saw her face, a face streaked with rain and tears, eyes wide with shock, yet filled with a profound sadness. She wasn't crying, but the sorrow in her expression was unmistakable. For a moment their eyes locked, and Jaden felt a chill crawl down his spine, something deep and unsettling. But before he could take another step, before he could even ask her who she was, she dropped the rag from her hands and bolted. Without a word she ran, her feet splashing through the puddles, her figure disappearing into the misty veil of the storm. "Wait!" Jaden shouted, instinctively rushing after her, his heart pounding in his chest. But no matter how fast he ran, the woman was too quick, too distant. His steps faltered as he watched her silhouette vanish completely, swallowed by the heavy downpour. Jaden stopped, panting, his breath coming in short bursts. He turned around, his eyes scanning the cemetery and the place he had once avoided, now filled with more questions than answers. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the strange feeling of loss that settled in his chest. She had been here for a reason, tending to a grave he had long neglected. A grave that belonged to his mother, the woman who had raised him, who had once held the key to his world. He didn't know why, but something inside him stirred. She had shown more care for his mother's memory than he ever had. And now she was gone. Who was she? Jaden asked himself again, his thoughts racing. He glanced down at his mother's grave, now slightly cleaner, thanks to the woman's tireless effort. The scene seemed surreal. Was this woman simply a stranger, or was there more to her than he realized? Unable to shake the image of her, Jaden pulled out his phone, his fingers cold and stiff as he typed a brief message. "Find out who she is." His assistant, who had been with him for years, knew to respond quickly when given an order. He didn't wait for a reply. Instead, he stared blankly out of the SUV window as his driver navigated through the rain-soaked streets of Lacora. His mind was consumed by thoughts of the woman, replaying her face over and over again. There was something about her, a connection perhaps, something that gnawed at him, making it impossible to focus on anything else. Jaden, the man who had the world at his feet, now felt the weight of something he couldn't explain. The mystery of the woman had taken root in his mind. She wasn't just someone cleaning a grave. She was a symbol of something he had lost, something he hadn't even realized he'd been searching for. As the rain continued to pour outside, the coldness of the world seemed to seep into the car. The usual comfort of his wealth, his empire, couldn't shield him from the uncertainty gnawing at his gut. Who was she? And why did she care about his mother's grave more than he ever had? The questions echoed in his mind as the city passed by. His heart beat faster with each unanswered thought. Jaden knew that this woman, this stranger, had sparked something in him that he couldn't ignore. And he wouldn't rest until he found her. The days that followed were unlike any Jaden Okoro had ever lived. For a man whose life was a seamless rhythm of schedules, board meetings, and wealth management, the encounter at the graveyard had thrown him into an emotional disarray he could neither name nor control. Every night, when he returned to his penthouse in Lacora's glass skyline, the world outside glittered, the city lights reflected in his tall windows like diamonds scattered across the horizon. Yet inside, everything felt hollow. The rain from that fateful afternoon still echoed in his memory. He couldn't stop hearing it, that rhythmic patter on cold marble, the same rain that had fallen as the mysterious woman cleaned his mother's grave with bare, bleeding hands. He had watched her run, but what lingered was the look in her eyes before she fled. It was not fear alone. It was grief, deep and raw. A sorrow that cut through the noise of his empire and silenced the arrogance of his success. That night, Jaden sat alone in his study, the glow from the city casting soft light across the expensive art and leather-bound books that lined his walls. He had built everything he thought he wanted: power, recognition, control, yet none of it could explain what had happened at that grave. He turned his gaze toward a framed portrait on his desk, his mother, radiant and graceful, smiling as though she had never known pain. He hadn't looked at that photo in years. For a moment his heart tightened, remembering how she used to call him, "My little storm," her voice tender, always patient with the boy who wanted to conquer the world. Now he realized the storm wasn't outside anymore. It was within him. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Idris," he said, his tone steady but colder than the night air. "Yes, sir," came his assistant's voice through the speaker. "I want someone watching the Lacora cemetery, every day, every night. If that woman returns, I want to know." There was a brief pause. "Understood, sir." Jaden ended the call. He knew it was madness. Billionaires didn't lose sleep over strangers, especially ones drenched in rags. But something about her, something about the devotion she showed to that grave, felt like a message, one meant for him. Days turned into weeks. Jaden went about his business as he always had, making deals that could tilt economies, signing contracts worth more than small nations. But no matter how busy he stayed, his mind kept returning to that single image, the woman kneeling in the rain, her hands trembling over the stone that marked his mother's resting place. He had Idris and his men search for her private investigators, ex-soldiers, even a few local street contacts. They scoured the city, but no one could find her. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. At first, Jaden told himself it was just curiosity. But soon curiosity became fixation, and fixation obsession. He started visiting the cemetery again every morning and evening. Sometimes he brought flowers. Sometimes he simply stood there silent, watching the wind move through the tall grass. The caretakers whispered among themselves what could draw a man like Jaden Okoro, one of Lakora's most powerful and guarded figures, to stand for hours in the rain beside a forgotten grave. No one dared to ask him. One night, as Jaden looked out over the Lakora skyline from his penthouse balcony, the ache inside him deepened. The rain had returned, falling in sheets against the glass. He sipped his whiskey, but the warmth did nothing to dull the unrest within him. He could still see her face in his mind, the tear-streaked woman who had fled from him without a word. Every detail haunted him. The dirt on her hand and the quiet pain in her eyes, the way she clung to that gravestone as if it were the last living thing she had left in the world. He found himself whispering to the empty air, "Why did you care for her grave when I didn't?" That question, more than anything, broke him. 2 weeks passed before his men finally brought back a trace of her. One of the night guards stationed near the cemetery reported seeing a figure kneeling at the grave again, the same woman, quiet and alone. Jaden didn't wait for another word. Within minutes, he was in his car, speeding through the sleeping city. The rain had softened to a drizzle when he arrived. The cemetery was dimly lit by the headlights of his car, the night air thick and heavy. And there she was, just as before, kneeling in the mud, her fragile figure hunched over the stone, wiping away the moss that had gathered since her last visit. Jaden stepped out of the car slowly, not wanting to startle her. For a long moment he simply watched, unable to move or speak. She looked almost ghostly, a shadow from another world, caught between grief and devotion. He finally found his voice. "Why?" he said softly. "Why do you do this?" The woman froze. Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn immediately. Then slowly, she rose to her feet, her wet dress clinging to her form, her hands trembling at her sides. When she did look at him, her eyes met his, and he saw it again. That same sorrow, that same haunting silence. He took a step forward, rain trickling down his face. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "tell me who you are." But she didn't. Her lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. The silence between them stretched thin, heavy with things neither could understand. Then, before Jaden could move, she turned and ran once more, her figure vanishing into the fog. He chased her, but his feet sank in the mud, the rain slowing him down. The faint echo of her footsteps faded into nothing. This time, when he stopped, the frustration in him turned to desperation. Jaden stood there, soaked to the skin, staring into the darkness where she had disappeared. He could feel something deep inside him shift, something unfamiliar, something human. He whispered to himself, "You can run, but I will find you." And in that vow, uttered beneath the falling rain, began the quiet unraveling of the man the world thought was untouchable. The night the rain fell hardest, fate decided to return what it had once taken away. It had been 6 long months since Jaden Okoro last saw the woman who haunted his every waking thought, the nameless stranger whose devotion to his mother's memory had shattered the walls around his soul. 6 months of endless searching, 6 months of quiet obsession, 6 months of visiting the same grave, hoping she would come back. But she never did. At first, Jaden had sent his men to watch, to patrol, to monitor every inch of the Lakora cemetery. They were to alert him the moment she appeared. Yet weeks turned to months, and she never came. He began to wonder if she was even real, or if she had been nothing more than a ghost born from his guilt and loneliness. And then on one quiet evening, when he had almost given up hope, his phone rang. "Sir," Idris's voice came through, urgent, breathless. "She's back." Jaden didn't wait for another word. Within minutes, he was behind the wheel of his car, tearing through the city streets as thunder rolled above him. The rain had already begun heavy, unrelenting, but this time he didn't care. The cemetery looked different at night. The moon was half hidden behind clouds, and lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the headstones like fleeting ghosts. And Jaden's headlights cut through the darkness as he parked and stepped out, the rain soaking him instantly. And there she was, kneeling again by his mother's grave, just as she had before. The same devotion, the same sorrow. Her hands moved in slow, deliberate motions as she cleared away the fresh weeds that had grown over time. She looked thinner now, her frame fragile against the storm. But her determination was the same, unwavering, desperate. Jaden stood frozen for a moment, watching her. The rain ran down his face, cold and sharp, but he barely noticed. His heart pounded in his chest as 1,000 emotions collided within him. Relief, anger, longing, confusion. He stepped forward. The sound of his shoes splashing in the puddles made her pause. She looked up. Their eyes met again through the rain, and for a single moment, time seemed to stop. "You came back," Jaden said softly. The woman didn't answer. She rose to her feet, trembling slightly, her wet dress clinging to her as the wind whipped her hair around her face. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but there was something else, too, something familiar, something almost tender. Jaden took another step closer. "Please, I just want to understand. Who are you? Why do you keep coming here?" She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her lips quivered, and tears mingled with the rain on her cheeks. And then she ran. Jaden's heart lurched. "No, wait!" He chased after her, his footsteps splashing through the mud, his breath ragged. The world blurred around him, the rain, the trees, the tombstones flashing past like ghosts. She reached the road that bordered the cemetery, her bare feet slipping on the slick pavement. She looked back one last time, her eyes wide with terror. "Then headlights!" A sharp, blinding flash of light, the screech of tires, the sound of impact. Jaden froze. For a split second, the world stopped moving. The car sped away into the night, leaving behind only silence and the sound of falling rain. He stumbled forward, his chest tightening. She was lying on the wet ground, motionless, her dress torn, her hair spread like a dark halo around her head. Blood mixed with rainwater, forming small rivers that trickled across the pavement. Jaden dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he lifted her gently. Hey, no, stay with me," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You're going to be fine. You hear me? You're going to be fine." Her eyelids fluttered. For a moment, her gaze met his, weak, distant, but still filled with that same sorrow he had seen months ago. She tried to speak, but only a faint whisper escaped her lips. Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. Jaden's heart clenched. He could feel the panic rising inside him, but he forced himself to act. He shouted for help, his voice echoing through the empty night. His driver came running, drenched and alarmed. "Get the car," Jaden barked. "Now!" Together they lifted her into the back seat. Jaden held her in his arms the entire way, pressing his hand against the wound on her forehead, praying she would open her eyes again. The drive to his private clinic felt endless. Every second stretched into eternity. Every breath she took, shallow and weak, felt like a miracle. When they arrived, doctors rushed her into emergency care. Jaden paced the waiting room, his clothes soaked, his heart heavy with guilt. He had chased her into danger. If anything happened to her, it would be his fault. Hours passed. The storm outside began to fade. The world grew quiet again. Finally, a doctor emerged, his expression serious but calm. "She'll live," he said. "But there's something you need to know." Jaden's heart leapt. "What?" The doctor hesitated. "The head injury was severe. She's stable now, but she has no memory of who she is. Her name, her past, everything. It's gone." Jaden felt the words hit him like a wave. Memory loss. The woman who had haunted his mind for months, the woman who might hold the answers to his questions, now remembered nothing at all. He stared through the glass window at her still form lying on the hospital bed. The faint rise and fall of her chest was the only proof that she was alive. The moonlight filtered through the blind, casting soft shadows across her face. She looked peaceful now, almost angelic. And yet, Jaden couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. He pressed his palm against the glass, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who you are," he said softly, "but I swear, I'll take care of you, whatever it takes." The rain had stopped by the time dawn broke over Lacora City. The storm that had once raged outside now seemed to live inside Jaden Okoro's heart. He stood in the quiet hallway of his private clinic, watching through the glass as the woman, the same one who had haunted his thoughts for months, now lay still beneath the soft, white sheets of a hospital bed. She looked fragile, impossibly so. Her hair framed her face in soft, damp curls, and her lips were pale, trembling faintly with each shallow breath. The doctors had said she would live, that she was stable, but the words that followed had struck deeper than he cared to admit. She remembered nothing. Her name, her past, her reason for being at his mother's grave, all of it had been wiped away by the accident, leaving behind a silence so complete that it frightened him. Jaden stood by her bedside, his hands buried deep in his pockets. For a man who could command entire industries with a word, he felt utterly powerless. When she opened her eyes at last, confusion filled them, a soft, fragile fear, like a child waking in a strange place. Her gaze moved slowly across the room until it settled on him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. He wanted to speak, to ask her what she remembered, if anything, to demand answers about the grave, his mother, and why she had disappeared, but something in her expression stopped him. Her silence was not defiance. It was emptiness. So instead he said the only thing he could. "Don't be afraid. You're safe now." The words sounded strange coming from him. Safe, a word he rarely used, one that had never belonged in his world of ruthless ambition and relentless control. The woman blinked, as though trying to make sense of his voice. Then she nodded faintly, her lips parting in a weak whisper. "Who are you?" The question pierced him deeper than he expected. "I'm Jaden," he said softly. "You were hurt, but you're safe now." Her brows furrowed slightly, and her eyes grew distant again. Whatever memory she searched for was gone. He realized then that her mind was a blank page, a life erased, waiting to be rewritten. Days turned into weeks. She stayed in his care, and Jaden found himself doing something he had never done before waiting. Every morning he visited her room. Sometimes she would be sitting by the window, staring out at the city skyline, lost in thought. Other times she would simply sit in silence, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze distant. The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia, but Jaden didn't care about the terminology. What mattered to him was that she was there, alive, breathing, and for reasons he couldn't explain, part of his world now. He arranged everything she could possibly need: specialists from abroad, private therapists, the finest meals, and even a wardrobe tailored to her size. Oh, he told himself it was out of guilt that he owed her for the accident, but deep down he knew it was something else. She had become a quiet presence in his life, softening the edges of his loneliness. The woman spoke little, but when she did, her voice was gentle, almost musical. She never complained, never asked questions. She simply existed, moving through his penthouse like a ghost who had forgotten how to haunt. One afternoon, while she sat in the sunroom surrounded by pale curtains and potted plants, Jaden entered quietly. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You need a name," he said finally. "Something to call you." She looked up, curious, her eyes calm but empty. He smiled faintly, a rare thing for him. "How about Catherine?" The name seemed to hang in the air between them. For a moment she said nothing. Then slowly her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Catherine," she repeated softly, as though testing it on her tongue. Jaden's heart skipped. It was the first time he had heard her say a word that wasn't born of confusion or fear. From that day, she became Catherine. The weeks that followed were quiet but transformative. Catherine began to adapt to her new surroundings, her new life. She learned to walk through the mansion without getting lost, to find comfort in the rhythm of the day. Sometimes she would sit in the garden and watch the koi swim lazily in the pond. Other times she would sit beside the grand piano and hum softly to herself, though she couldn't remember the words to any song. And Jaden, the man whose every second had once been bought and scheduled, began to slow down. He found himself canceling meetings, postponing flights, and spending more time at home. At night he would walk past Catherine's room and see the soft light of her bedside lamp glowing faintly beneath the door. She often couldn't sleep, but neither could he. Sometimes he would find her standing on the balcony, staring out into the night, the wind gently brushing her hair. He never disturbed her during those moments. Somehow watching her in silence brought him peace. The world began to whisper about him, the billionaire who had vanished from society's circles, who no longer attended galas or closed-door summits. They said he had lost focus, that perhaps he was ill. But Jaden didn't care. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing profit. He was chasing meaning. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Licora skyline, Catherine joined him at dinner for the first time since her recovery. The table, always set for one, now had 2 plates. She looked nervous, but Jaden smiled gently and gestured for her to sit. "You don't have to be afraid," he said. "This is your home now." Her eyes widened slightly, glistening under the candlelight. "My home?" she repeated softly, almost unbelieving. "Yeah," Jaden said, his voice calm and certain. "Your home." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she nodded silently. In that moment, something shifted in the air, something fragile, something unspoken. Jaden didn't name it, but he felt it deep within him. The emptiness that had once consumed his life was slowly being filled by the quiet presence of this woman who remembered nothing. He looked across the table at her and realized something he had never expected to feel again. Peace. But beneath that peace, something else stirred a question, a shadow that refused to be silenced. Who had she been before the accident? And why, of all places, had she been at his mother's grave? The answers were buried deep in the past, waiting to resurface. And when they did, they would change everything. Time has a strange way of softening pain. It doesn't erase it, but it reshapes it, turning sharp wounds into quiet aches that hum in the background of daily life. For Jaden Okoro, the days that followed were unlike anything he had ever known. His penthouse, once filled with the cold hum of solitude, now carried the soft rhythm of shared existence. Catherine, though she remembered nothing of her past, was slowly learning to live again. Jaden had given her a world of comfort, but comfort was not what changed her. It was his presence, the quiet way he lingered in the background, watching without intruding, helping without demanding. For a man who had ruled the world through power and precision, Jaden had found something disarming in simplicity. He had grown used to the sound of her voice, even though she spoke little. Sometimes she would hum softly while tending to the garden balcony. Other times she would ask him the smallest of questions: how to make tea, which door led to the library, or why the rain made her heart feel heavy. Each question was like a small key unlocking pieces of her innocence. And though Jaden told himself it was compassion that drove him, he knew the truth. He was falling in love. At first he resisted it. Love in his mind was chaos. It was loss. It was pain. He had buried it with his mother and replaced it with ambition. But Catherine, she was different. She didn't want his wealth or his name. She didn't even understand how much power he held. To her, he was simply Jaden, the quiet man who sat beside her at breakfast, who brought her tea when nightmares stole her sleep, who never asked for anything in return. Their connection was not born of passion, but of presence. He began to notice small things. The way she lingered by the piano, though she claimed not to know how to play. The way her eyes softened whenever he mentioned his mother. The faint sadness that clouded her smile whenever rain touched the windows. Somewhere deep within, he knew her lost memories were not gone. They were sleeping. And whatever they were tied to his mother's grave. Still, he couldn't bring himself to push her. Not yet. He preferred this peace, the fragile stillness between them. One evening, as the Lacora skyline shimmered with golden light, Catherine joined Jaden on the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below them, its chaos muted by the glass and height. She wore a soft white dress that brushed her ankles, her hair caught gently by the breeze. She stood beside him in silence for a long time before she spoke. "Do you ever get lonely?" The question startled him. He looked at her, unsure how to answer. "Sometimes," he admitted, "even when I'm surrounded by people." She nodded slowly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "I feel that too, even when I don't remember what I've lost. I feel like something's missing." Jaden's chest tightened. "What do you think it is?" She turned to him, her voice soft. "Maybe the part of me that belongs somewhere." He wanted to tell her she belonged now, that she had found her place here with him. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he simply reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her eyes met his. Neither of them spoke, but in that silence, something shifted. From that night on, their connection deepened in unspoken ways. Catherine began spending more time in Jaden's world. She accompanied him to his meetings, curious and attentive, asking innocent questions about his work. People whispered about the mysterious woman who seemed to appear by his side without title or past, but Jaden didn't care. He saw her not as an intruder, but as a reflection of something he had long forgotten: humanity. Still, not everything was calm. Some nights, Catherine would wake up screaming, her body trembling, her hands clutching her chest. She would cry out for someone, though she didn't know who. Jaden would rush to her side, holding her until the storm passed. She never remembered the dreams, only the fear they left behind. "It's like someone is calling me," she whispered one night, her voice breaking. "But I don't know who." Jaden didn't answer. He simply held her tighter. Days passed, then weeks. The rhythm of their lives settled into something fragile but beautiful. Jaden had stopped questioning what others thought. For the first time since his mother's death, he felt alive. And yet, beneath the surface of that peace, an unease began to grow. It came in flashes, moments when Catherine would pause mid-sentence, her eyes distant, her hands trembling lightly as if caught between two worlds. Sometimes she would whisper strange things. "I know this scent. I've been here before. She had your eyes." Jaden would ask what she meant, but she would only shake her head, confused and frightened. He told himself it was the brain healing, that memories often resurfaced in fragments. But deep inside, he felt the same cold dread he had felt the day she first appeared at the grave. There was something about her, something he wasn't meant to understand yet. Still, when she smiled, all doubts disappeared. When she laughed, even briefly, the world felt lighter. And when she called his name softly, without fear or formality, he knew that no matter what secrets her past held, he would not let her go. But fate, as always, was patient. And though Jaden believed he was healing, the truth was far more dangerous. For Catherine's forgotten life was not gone. It was waiting, just beyond the veil of memory, ready to return. And when it did, it would tear open everything they had built. There comes a point when peace begins to feel like a lie, when stillness becomes so fragile that even the smallest breeze feels like a threat. That was the quiet that filled Jaden Okoro's mansion now. From the outside, his world looked perfect. The tabloids called it the miracle of Lakora, the billionaire who had vanished from public life, only to reappear with a mysterious woman by his side. The whispers were constant. Who was she? A lover? A savior? A secret wife? But behind the walls of glass and marble, Jaden and Catherine lived in a delicate rhythm, a life that balanced love on the edge of fear. Because Catherine's peace had begun to tremble. At first it was subtle, a name whispered in her sleep, a sound that made her flinch, a sudden pause in conversation, her eyes going blank as though she were somewhere else entirely. She would awaken at night, breathing heavily, her hands pressed against her chest, whispering fragments of things she could not understand. "Don't let them take me. She's crying again." Blood on the wall. Jaden never pressed her for answers. He couldn't. The more she tried to remember, the more pain it caused her, and the more it terrified him. Because every time she drifted into the past, he felt her slipping away. And he couldn't bear to lose her. Not again. One evening, a storm rolled across Lakora, heavy and restless. The kind of rain that seemed to mimic the tension inside the house. Jaden was working in his study when he heard the faint sound of the piano playing from the main hall. He froze. No one had touched that piano in years, not since his mother died. He walked out quietly, his footsteps muffled by the soft rug. And there she was, Catherine, sitting at the piano, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys, playing a melody so haunting that it sent a chill down his spine. He stood at a distance watching. She played with closed eyes, her head tilted slightly, as though the song was guiding her somewhere deep within her soul. When she finally stopped, she opened her eyes slowly, as if waking from a dream. Jaden stepped forward. "You played that beautifully," he said softly. Catherine blinked, startled. "Don't know how I did that," she whispered. "It just came to me, like I'd played it before." Jaden felt his throat tighten. That melody, it was the same one his mother used to hum when he was a child. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he smiled faintly, though the unease in his chest refused to fade. "Maybe it's a good sign," he said. "Maybe your memories are coming back." Catherine frowned, her fingers still resting on the piano keys. "But what if I don't want them to?" she asked quietly. "What if I remember something that changes everything?" Jaden hesitated. His instinct was to tell her that nothing could change how he felt, that whatever her past held, it didn't matter. But deep down, a voice whispered something he couldn't silence. "You're lying." Because it did matter. Whatever connected her to his mother's grave, to that night of storm and sorrow, still waited in the shadows, and he feared what would happen when the truth came to light. A few days later, that shadow took form. Jaden was in his office when Idris entered, his expression cautious. "Sir," he said carefully, "someone has been asking questions about Miss Catherine." Jaden looked up sharply. "Who?" "Vanessa," Idris said. The name hit him like ice. Vanessa, his ex-lover, the woman who once wore his name like a crown and his heart like a trophy. The one who had betrayed him, lied to him, used him, and nearly destroyed him. "What does she want?" he asked, his tone flat. "She says she's heard rumors, that you've taken in a woman. She's interested." Jaden's jaw tightened. Tell her nothing. But Vanessa was not the kind of woman who took silence for an answer. 3 nights later, she appeared uninvited. Catherine was in the garden, tending to the lilies, when she heard the sound of heels clicking against the stone path. She turned and saw a tall woman in a crimson dress, her beauty sharp, almost dangerous. Vanessa smiled the way a snake does before it strikes. "So you're the reason Jaden's been hiding," she said smoothly. "I must say, you don't look like much." Catherine frowned, confused. "Who are you?" "Someone who used to know him better than you ever will," Vanessa said, stepping closer. "Tell me, darling, what are you to him? A project? A pity case?" Before Catherine could answer, Jaden's voice cut through the air, firm and cold. "Vanessa." He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're not welcome here." Vanessa turned, her smile sweet but her eyes venomous. "Oh, Jaden, I just wanted to see what you've replaced me with." "Leave," he said. She laughed softly. "You always did like your mysteries, didn't you? But tell me, does she even know who she is? Or are you keeping that secret too?" Catherine's eyes flicked to Jaden, confusion spreading across her face. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing," Jaden said quickly. "Vanessa's just—" But Vanessa cut him off. "She was at your mother's grave, wasn't she?" The words struck like thunder. Catherine froze. Jaden's face hardened. Vanessa smirked. "I did my research. Poor little thing. Cleaning graves in the rain. You really do have a type, Jaden. The broken ones." Jaden stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Get out." Vanessa smiled, her victory complete. "Fine. But you can't hide the truth forever. When she remembers who she is, you'll wish you never found her." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking like distant gunshots against the marble floor. That night, Jaden sat alone in his study, the storm raging outside once again. Catherine didn't come to dinner. She stayed in her room, silent and distant. He wanted to go to her, to tell her everything would be fine. But deep down, he knew the walls were beginning to crack. The peace they had built was built on forgetting, and the past was already finding its way back. It is said that the past never truly dies. It sleeps, waiting patiently for the right moment to rise, and when it does, it tears through the peace we thought would last forever. In the days after Vanessa's visit, the atmosphere in Jaden Okoro's mansion shifted. The air grew heavier, conversations shorter, silences longer. Catherine no longer smiled the way she used to. Something inside her had changed. Her dreams grew darker, sharper. She would wake in the night with trembling hands, whispering names she didn't remember knowing. And though Jaden tried to reassure her, his own heart was restless. Vanessa's words echoed in his mind. When she remembers who she is, you'll wish you never found her. He wanted to dismiss it as malice, the cruelty of a bitter ex-lover. But deep down, he knew. Vanessa never lied to wound. She lied to destroy, and destruction always had a seed of truth. One evening, Catherine found herself wandering through the west wing of the mansion, a part of the house she had never explored before. The air there was cold and untouched, the walls lined with paintings and family photographs. She stopped before one frame in particular, a portrait of Jaden's mother. The woman's eyes, gentle and kind, seemed to follow her. Catherine stepped closer, her breath catching as a sharp, unexpected pain flashed behind her eyes. In an instant, a vision tore through her mind, flashes of light and color, fragments of memory rushing like a flood, a warm hand stroking her hair, a soft voice saying, "You're safe here, my dear." And then the same woman's scream, "A fall! Blood on the wall!" Catherine gasped, clutching her head. The memory faded as quickly as it came, leaving her trembling on the floor. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. The woman in that portrait wasn't just Jaden's mother. She was part of her story, too. When Jaden found her later that night, she was sitting in the dark study, staring at the photograph. Her voice was quiet when she finally spoke. "Jaden, why didn't you tell me what happened to your mother?" Jaden hesitated. "Because it wasn't something you needed to know." "But I do need to know," she said firmly. "I saw her, Jaden. I remember her face." Jaden's eyes widened. "You remember her?" Catherine nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "She helped me. I was hurt, I think. I don't remember everything, but she saved me, and then—" She paused, her voice breaking. "She was gone. Someone hurt her. Someone, because of me." Jaden felt the air leave his lungs. His heart pounded in his chest. "What are you saying?" he whispered. Catherine turned to him, her face pale, her voice shaking. "Your mother died. Because of me." The words shattered the silence. Jaden stepped back, disbelief written across his face. "No," he said quickly. "That's impossible. You couldn't have—" "I'm telling you what I remember," she said desperately. "I don't know how, but I was there that night. There were men, angry, shouting. She tried to protect me. And then she fell." Her tears came freely now, her voice breaking under the weight of guilt she couldn't even fully remember. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't even know her name. But I can still hear her voice. She told me to run." Jaden felt his world tilt. His mind raced through the fragments of his own past, the night his mother died, the unanswered questions, the police report that spoke of an accident, but never explained the bruises, the broken furniture, the chaos. He had buried that night deep inside him, locking it away behind walls of denial. Now standing before him was the woman who claimed to have been there, the woman who had become his solace, his redemption, his love. He couldn't speak. Catherine took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Say something, Jaden." But he couldn't. He turned away, his hands pressed to his forehead, his breath coming fast. "I need to think," he said hoarsely. "Please," she whispered, reaching for him. "I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't even know who I was." Jaden's shoulders stiffened. "And maybe it should have stayed that way." The words hung in the air, heavy and cruel. The moment they left his mouth, he regretted them, but it was too late. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. She stepped back slowly, shaking her head. "I understand," she said softly. "You hate me now." "I don't," he began, but the words caught in his throat. Catherine turned and fled from the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. The same sound he had heard months ago when she first ran from him in the rain. Only this time, it wasn't fear driving her. It was heartbreak. That night, Jaden sat alone in the study, the sound of the storm outside mirroring the chaos in his heart. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. His thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, grief, and denial. Was this truly the woman responsible for his mother's death? Or was she just another victim tangled in a web of guilt that wasn't hers to bear? He wanted to forgive her. But forgiveness required certainty, and right now certainty was the one thing he didn't have. And as he sat in that silence, the weight of destiny pressed down on him, once more reminding him that no truth stays buried forever. For 2 days, the mansion remained silent, not the gentle silence of peace, but the heavy kind that hangs after words too painful to take back. Jaden Okoro stayed locked in his study, the scent of whiskey mingling with rain-soaked air. Catherine did not leave her room. Meals went untouched, the halls unlit. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. And then on the third morning, the truth began to surface. Catherine woke from another restless night. The dreams had grown vivid, now too vivid to ignore. She saw faces she had never named, voices calling her Annie, a house filled with shouting, and a woman's scream that pierced through her memory like a blade. She knew now that the time had come to stop running from her past. When she stepped into the study, Jaden looked up from behind his desk. He hadn't slept either. His eyes were rimmed red, his shirt rumpled, but his gaze was sharp, wounded, guarded. "I remember," she said quietly. The words froze him. He rose from his chair, unsure whether to go to her or keep his distance. "What did you remember?" Catherine's voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "Everything." It began years ago, before she ever set foot in the cemetery. Her real name was Annie Okafor, the daughter of a once powerful family whose wealth had been built on deceit and manipulation. Her mother, cold and proud, had always resented her. To her, Annie was not a daughter, but a mirror, a reminder of her own fading beauty and a threat to her control. After her father's sudden death, things spiraled. Her mother's cruelty deepened, turning into something darker. "She blamed me," Catherine whispered, "for his death, for her loneliness, for everything. She said I had cursed her life, that I'd taken everything from her." She had tried to run away once, but the world outside was cruel, and her mother's reach was long. Then one night, when things had grown unbearable, Annie fled again, barefoot and terrified. And that was when she met her. "Your mother," she said, her voice breaking. "She found me outside a church, shivering and bleeding. She didn't know who I was, didn't ask questions. She just took me in." Catherine's eyes glistened as she remembered. "She treated me like her own daughter, Jaden. For the first time in my life, someone loved me without wanting anything back. She told me stories about you, about how driven you were, how she prayed every night that you'd find peace." Jaden's breath caught in his throat. "But then," Catherine's voice faltered. My mother found out. She sent men to bring me home her thugs. They came to your mother's house one evening. She tried to stop them. She stood in their way. They pushed her. A tear slid down her cheek. She hit her head on the marble wall. I screamed for help, but they ran. She tried to speak, but she couldn't breathe. The last thing she said to me was, "Run, my child. Don't let them take you." The room went still. Jaden stood motionless, his chest tight, the words tearing through the walls he had built inside himself. He had spent years blaming fate, blaming himself, never knowing that the woman he loved was the living echo of that night. Catherine wiped her tears. I stayed near her grave after that every week. I cleaned it, brought flowers, prayed for forgiveness. It was the only way I could live with myself. She turned to him, her voice breaking. That's why I ran when you found me that day. I knew your face. You looked just like her. I couldn't bear it. But when I saw you again, after the accident, after everything, I didn't remember any of it. Not until now. Jaden closed his eyes. He didn't know what to say. The truth, the one he had chased for years, had finally come, and it had shattered everything. He wanted to be angry. He wanted to shout, to curse fate for its cruel symmetry. But as he looked at her, he saw not a killer, not even a cause, but the same broken girl his mother had once taken in. The same soul his mother had died protecting. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost fragile. My mother saved you once, he said. And maybe she saved me by bringing you back. Catherine's tears fell freely now. You don't hate me? Jaden shook his head. I did. For a moment. But I think she would have wanted me to forgive you. She always said, love is the only thing strong enough to break curses. Maybe this is what she meant. He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. Catherine stood trembling, her hands clasped together, and then, without a word, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. They stayed like that for a long time, two souls bound by loss, held together by the fragile thread of forgiveness. Outside, the storm broke, and the morning light began to pour through the tall windows, washing the room in gold. It felt like the first sunrise after years of darkness. That evening, Jaden returned to his mother's grave. Catherine stood beside him, her hand entwined with his. The air was still, the scent of rain lingering in the soil. Together they knelt before the marble stone. I used to think this grave was where everything ended, Jaden said softly. Now I see it's where everything began. Catherine placed a white lily beside the headstone. She gave us both a second chance, she whispered. And I'll spend the rest of my life honoring that. They stood in silence, the past finally at rest between them. For Jaden, the grave no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a bridge between what was lost and what could still be found. And as they walked away, side by side, the light followed them, spilling over the path like a quiet promise that redemption, once embraced, could bloom even from the deepest sorrow. For the first time in years, the mansion did not feel haunted. The silence that once carried ghosts now carried peace. The air was lighter, the corridors warmer. The heavy rain that had so often framed their pain had given way to sunlight spilling through tall windows, dusting the marble floors with gold. Jaden Okoro had known power, wealth, and fear, but never stillness. Now, in the quiet company of the woman who had once symbolized his deepest sorrow, he felt something he hadn't dared to believe in since his mother's death: wholeness. Forgiveness, he learned, is not loud. It doesn't arrive with thunder or applause. It comes gently like morning light creeping into a dark room. And in that light, love began to bloom again. Catherine moved through her days with new purpose. The weight of guilt had not vanished, but it no longer controlled her. She spent mornings in the garden, tending the lilies she and Jaden had planted near the reflecting pool lilies that now stood tall and white, symbols of the peace they had fought so hard to earn. Sometimes she would pause to watch Jaden from the balcony. He had returned to his work, but not to his old self. The man who once commanded boardrooms with an iron voice now carried a quieter strength, one that came not from dominance, but from understanding. The world noticed the change. His company, once known for its ruthless expansion, had begun sponsoring rehabilitation programs and women's shelters across Licora. When reporters asked why, he simply said, "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over." Few knew that those words were not about charity. They were about Catherine and the woman who had given her and him a second chance. Every Sunday, they visited the cemetery together. The grave that had once been a place of torment was now their sanctuary. Jaden would bring fresh roses. Catherine brought lilies. They would kneel side by side, speaking not in grief but in gratitude. "She's not just gone," Catherine said one morning, her eyes bright with quiet reverence. "She's here, in you, in everything we've built." Jaden smiled faintly. "She'd be proud of you." Catherine shook her head gently. "No, she'd be proud of us." Yet peace, though beautiful, does not erase the past, it transforms it. There were nights when Catherine still woke trembling, echoes of her mother's voice chasing her from sleep. Jaden would be there beside her, wrapping his arms around her until her breathing steadied. "Every scar tells a story," he once told her. "Ours just happened to find each other." And in those words she found the courage to begin again. Not as Annie Okafor, the girl who had run from pain, but as Catherine, the woman who had survived it. Months passed, and their love grew quietly. Not the kind that burns bright and fast, but the kind that endures, patient and forgiving. They didn't need grand declarations or public vows. Their bond was already sealed in loss, in redemption, and in the graveyard where their lives had first crossed. Still, one evening, under the soft lights of the Licora skyline, Jaden turned to her with a look she had never seen before, not of guilt, not of longing, but of peace. He took her hand, his voice low. "You once said you didn't know where you belonged. Do you still feel that way?" Catherine smiled softly, her eyes glistening. "No," she said. "I'm home." And for Jaden Okoro, who had built empires to fill the void his mother's death left behind, those words were the only empire he ever needed. Weeks later, they returned to the grave one last time before traveling abroad to begin their new life together. The lilies had bloomed wider than ever, their white petals glowing beneath the morning sun. Catherine knelt and traced the inscription with her fingertips. "Beloved Mother, light to all who are lost." She whispered a promise. "I'll carry her light with me." Jaden stood behind her, watching the breeze ripple through the grass. In that moment, the grave no longer marked an ending. It marked the place where love began again. As they walked away hand in hand, the city stretched before them, alive, vast, and forgiving. The weight they had once carried had transformed into something gentler, a reminder that even from tragedy, beauty could bloom. The past would always be a part of them, but it no longer owned them. They had turned pain into peace, loss into purpose, and guilt into grace. And so, beneath the wide sky of Licora, the story that began with rain finally ended in sunlight, not with sorrow, but with redemption.